Welcome back, everyone, to Green Dolphin Science.
Great to be back.
Today, we're diving deep back into the ocean, specifically the coral reefs of the Maldives.
Yes, a really critical ecosystem.
We've touched on ocean health before, but this time we're zoning in on a pretty concerning study. It's from the Marine Pollution Bulletin.
And it found microplastics actually inside reef-building corals there.
Exactly, inside the corals themselves.
Yeah, and what's really significant is that this study is basically the first of its kind for the Maldives region, which is globally important for its reefs.
So our mission today is to unpack what the researchers found, what it might mean, but keep it understandable.
Right. Avoid getting lost in the jargon. So maybe let's start with the basics. Why are microplastics, such a big deal in the ocean?
Good point. The study itself highlights this. These tiny bits of plastic, like less than 5 millimeters across.
Smaller than a fingernail, yeah.
So everywhere now. A dominant type of marine debris. And because they're so small,
marine life just accidentally eats them. It's unavoidable for many species.
And this study, it focused specifically on the Maldives. Huge reef system there, 7th largest globally, I think.
That's right. So researchers wanted to know, are microplastics getting into these corals? And does it matter, say, how deep the water is or if the coral is inside or outside the atoll?
They looked at 3 main species, right? Porates, lutea.
Pavonavarians and Pacillopora verrucosa. Different types, different shapes.
So the big question, what did they actually find?
Okay, here's where it gets quite sobering, really. They found that over half, 58% of the coral colonies they looked at had microplastics inside them.
Wow, over half. That's significant.
It is. And these particles were tiny, 25 to 150 micrometers. Very small, the highest amount they found. That was in one particular Pacillopora verrucosa coral, the branching kind, from a shallow inner reef area.
Okay, and what kind of plastic was it mostly? Was it like fishing lines or?
Good question. No, it was mainly polyethylene, PE, and polypropylene, PP. Think packaging materials.
Oh, right, the everyday stuff.
Exactly. That made up about 63% of what they found. There were smaller amounts of others, too, like polystyrene.
And what form were they in? Fibers? Fragments?
Mostly films and foams, interestingly. Fewer fibers compared to some other studies. And the colors were often brown and pink.
Brown and pink. Any idea why?
Well, they also noted signs of sun damage, weathering. It suggests these plastics weren't, brand new. They'd been floating around, breaking down from larger items.
That makes sense. Now, location. You'd think corals closer to islands, closer to people would have more plastic?
That's the logical assumption, yeah. They compared inner reefs near islands to outer reefs facing the open ocean and shallow versus deeper areas.
Was there a difference?
Surprisingly, not a statistically significant one in the overall concentration. It kind of suggests the problem is, it's pretty widespread across the whole atoll system.
Widespread, okay. But you said the highest concentration was found somewhere specific.
Yes, that's the important nuance. While it was generally widespread, the sites with the absolute highest levels were near inhabited islands, particularly islands with known issues like open-air waste burning.
So local waste management, or maybe the lack of it, still seems to be a likely source, a key contributor.
It definitely points that way. Even in a place that seems remote, local activities matter.
How does this picture compare to, say, studies in other coral regions?
It generally aligns, unfortunately. Research in Southeast Asia, the South China Sea, they've also found microplastics in corals. As I mentioned, this Maldives study found fewer fibers, perhaps,
But comparing studies is tricky.
Very tricky. Different methods, different ways of collecting and analyzing samples. It really highlights a need for more standardized approaches globally so we can compare apples to apples,
Definitely. Okay, something else they looked at were phthalates, PAEs, those chemicals that can leach out of plastics.
Yes, they looked for those too because they can be harmful to marine life on their own.
And did they find a link? More plastic equals more PAEs in the coral.
Here's another interesting bit. They didn't find a direct correlation. No clear link between the amount of microplastic particles and the concentration of these PAE chemicals in the coral tissue.
Why might that be?
Well, it suggests the relationship is complex. It's not straightforward. It could also be partly down to the detection method used. They mentioned it might have primarily picked up unbounded PAEs, meaning ones not yet fully integrated or locked within the coral system, perhaps. More research needed there for sure.
Okay, and one last detail you mentioned, the Pacillopora, the branching coral, had the highest amounts.
That's right.
Any thoughts on why that species in particular?
The researchers themselves suggested its physical shape, its morphology, being complex and branchy.
Like a net.
Exactly. It might just be physically better at trapping small particles floating by in the water compared to the more massive boulder-like shapes of the other two species they studied.
Right. That makes intuitive sense. So let's try and pull this all together. What's the big takeaway from this Maldives study?
I think the crucial takeaway is this is the first concrete proof that microplastics are getting inside the tissues of these key reef-building corals in the Maldives. That's a major finding for such a vital reef area.
And it adds another layer of stress, doesn't it? On top of warming waters, acidification.
Precisely. These ecosystems are already facing so many threats. This is an additional potential stressor, raising serious questions about their long-term health and resilience.
And even though the plastic seems widespread, those hotspots near inhabited islands really underline the impact of local pollution sources.
Yes, and the fact the plastics were weathered shows it's also part of that bigger global cycle of plastic breaking down and moving through the oceans. It's not just immediate dumping.
Plus, that complex situation with the PAEs reminds us we're really just starting to understand the full, intricate effects of plastic pollution. It's not simple cause and effect.
Not at all. There are likely many subtle and complex interactions happening.
So this deep dive leaves us, and hopefully you listening, with a sobering thought. Even places we think of as pristine, like the Maldives, aren't immune.
It really brings home the global nature of the plastic problem.
Which makes you wonder, what steps, both locally and globally, can actually be taken to stem this flow of plastic into our oceans and protect these incredibly important underwater cities?
That's the critical question we need to keep asking and acting on.